Hey everybody, welcome back. I hope everybody's doing well. Hope you had a good weekend, safe weekend. First off, thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. So if you looked at the thumbnail today we're going to talk about Project Phoenix updates and rack and pinion rehab. What I mean by that is rack and pinions for these cars are getting super spendy. If you got a rack that's got a bad inner tie rod end or a bad outer tie rod end or a bad pressure line, or just kind of looks kind of bad but still works good, it's good and tight, it's just got parts that need replaced on it, you can do maintenance to your rack and pinion. You don't have to buy a new one. You can even change the upper output seal for the steering shaft where the steering goes in. It's not easy to do, but it's not hard to do. I've done that as well. This one was not leaking out of the boots on the ends, so the inner seals are good, and the steering shaft part was good. There was not much oil or not much dirt or anything on this rack and pinion. It was pretty clean. So I already degreased it and cleaned it up. I use Castrol Super Clean on this. It works really well on the aluminum housing, and a toothbrush. You can use a wire brush if you want to. It works just as good. I use a toothbrush because I like to try to save any stickers or paint marks that are on there. If you use a wire brush, it'll take right off. If you're not worried about that, wire brush is probably faster and easier to use. I'm going to give you a quick walk around on Project Phoenix and show you what it's looking like. It's looking super good. I'll show you what I got installed on that. I'll show you the engine. I've got the cylinder heads put back on. The valve job is done. I got the positive lock valve seals put on. New head bolts, head gaskets, intakes on, bolts cleaned up. Engine's looking like a new crate motor. It's turned out super nice. Just had a long weekend. Got some work done, not a lot of work done. Did a little time with the family in the pool and yard work and stuff like that. So thanks again for watching. I'll show you Project Phoenix real quick. I'll get on this rack and pinion rehab. I'll show you the parts I have, what I'm going to replace, and how to replace them. So if you want to watch how to kind of rebuild a rack and pinion, not have to spend $200 or $300 on a reman rack. They do make some new ones now, but the new rack and pinions are getting really expensive. So I try to save if they're good, if I can. If they're wore out, I replace them. But most of the time I find most of these original rack and pinions are actually still in really good shape, as long as, like I said, as long as they're not leaking fluid into the boots and stuff like that. And the inner seals, I've tried to replace those before. They're really a pain in the ass without the right tools, and that didn't work out too well. So if you take the boots off and fluid's coming out, you're going to need a new rack. This one here did not have that problem. So without further ado, I'm going to walk you guys around the engine bay on Project Phoenix, showing anybody that might be interested in this car what it's looking like, and let me know what you guys think. Check it out. There we go. So far on Project Phoenix, I got airbag sensors cleaned up, restored. The bolts cleaned up and restored. I redid all the wire and the wire loom with fresh correct tape. Clean up all the nice headlight sockets, got those all cleaned up. You know how gunky those get. I bought new airbox retaining bolts and bushings. There's the ECM harnesses in, got all that retaped, all that put back on where it's supposed to be. New heater core installed. I redid all the wire loom up here. Got the correct tabs put back in and all that, so everything's good and tight. Cleaned up all the metal brake lines. He hit them with etch prime and cleaned up the retaining clips and bolts. I replaced the brake booster. That's a Reman 93 Cobra brake booster. It's got a few pits in it. I did paint it. It was bare metal. Other than that, it looks really nice. New aluminum master cylinder. Again, I redid all the brake lines, cleaned up the prop valve, got all that electrical cleaned up. I do need to re-clean up the top hats. I'll do that once the engine back in. It's a lot easier with weight on the car to get these off without the suspension going all haywire. So that's it on the engine bay so far. Said everything's coming along super nice. Everything's looking good. So we'll walk over here. I got the engine covered up. I know you guys have seen it, but got the heads on it now and rocker arms and push rods. Like I said, I got the new Ford Racing positive lock seals. Checked all the spring pressures and all that stuff. Everything's looking like new. Push rods and all that. Redid the intake, bolts and all that stuff. So she's looking like a new crate motor. So that should look super nice in the car. Anybody just looking for a clean Fox. So that's it. We got more stuff from MPD and LMR. New overflow tank, throttle cable, throttle bracket, boot and all that stuff. Shift boot. So yeah, more new stuff. All right, so over here. So I'm gonna talk a little about the rack, inner tie rod, outer tie rod, how to replace that. Like I said, I've already cleaned this with the Purple Power, cleaned up real good when I was done. I got a tub over here. I cleaned it on this table with a toothbrush. It took me about probably 45 minutes to clean it up. And I'll show you a couple spots and what I used to clean this. Show you what I'm talking about. So this is a rack, super clean. This is what I mean by saving paint marks and decals. If you hit this with a wire brush, it'll take all that off. I like to try to keep that if I can. Now if you see some surface rust right here on these lines, what I use for that, and it'll take all of that off. This Rust-Oleum rust dissolver, it cleans it up like brand new money. And I'm going to clean that up off camera, and once it's done I'll show you. Now what I mean by boots, these boots right here, if you take this clamp off, this clip, and the easy way to do that, you put a straight screwdriver in this little slot right here, and then just kind of cock it sideways, and this clamp will loosen up, and you take this clamp off and slide it down. If you get fluid out of this boot, that means you got an internal leak in your seal right here. Now, with that being said, if it's just a small leak and it's still on the car and you're getting a little drip out of that boot, they do make a stop leak that actually works pretty well. I wouldn't say it's a permanent fix, but I've put them in some old beater Fox bodies that I've had in the days, and some SN cars, and it actually, I was able to run it for a year or two more and get more life out of that rack just by putting some stop leak in that rack and pinion. But that's not my intention here. This one wasn't leaking. So far, this really solid rack. So your inner tie rod ends, which this is the new ones right here, they go up inside this boot right here, and they just thread on. Now there is a lock pin right here. See this hole? There's a lock pin that sits in there on this. The factory uses a small pop rivet. So when you go to break it loose, it's going to be kind of hard to break that inner tie rod end loose because of that pop rivet. But just have somebody hold it, or if it's in the car, it's a lot easier. I just use a big crescent wrench and a pair of ice grips to hold the other end, and it works pretty easy. So I'm going to go ahead off camera. I'm going to clean a little bit of this surface rust off these lines up real quick, and I'm going to get my tools ready to take the boot off and the outer tie rod end off. I'm going to reuse the outer tie rod ends. They're actually really solid. They're really stiff. They've got these have the greasable outer tie rod ends on it already, so I like to try to keep those. Some of the factory ones don't have grease zerks in the bottom. You have to replace them. This ball joints are kind of the same way on the factory ones. So if you want to stay with me and watch this video, show you how to reman, refurb, rehab a rack and pinion. Just kind of budget for those of you who don't want to spend $300 on a rack. Just kind of clean it up and make it look better. So let's get to this and get this thing done. Okay, so I got this outer tie rod end off, and I'm going to show you guys a little trick as far as keeping your alignment set. You can probably keep it about 99% from where it was at when you take the inner and outer tie rod end off. I'll show you what I'm talking about real quick. So removing the outer tie rod end from the inner, there is a lock nut that goes right here. You basically break this lock nut loose off of this outer tie rod end, and then it just spins off. Don't move this nut from the inner tie rod end. Take a tape measure and just measure the distance from here and here, and then once you put your new inner tie rod in, put the nut at the same spot. Now this is the nut that came with this one. I'm going to reuse my original. It's over here getting de-rusted in this cool de-rust stuff. So as far as removing the clamp from this boot right here, I normally take a screwdriver up in here. I'll put it in this hole right here and then just twist it. And what that'll do, it'll open this clamp up so I can take the clamp off the dust boot and get to the inner tie rod end. So that's just a quick tip on keeping your alignment set. It is good enough till you can get it to an alignment shop, but if you get it where it's actually right where it needs to be when you go straight down the road, you're probably good and you wouldn't have it realigned. I've gotten away with that multiple times and had no issues with tire wear or anything like that. So that's just one of my tricks, and I'm going to go ahead and finish all this up, and we'll show you what it looks like, and we'll get to that inner tie rod end and get that swapped out as well and show you how to do that. Alright, so I tried to set the camera up a little bit to show you guys how to take this off, but you know how that goes. So now on the rack, this is the inner tie rod end. See how loose this is, all sloppy. The new one's good and tight like that. Now when I talk about measuring the gap for your threads as far as setting your alignment, always check these when you take them off and make sure they're the same length. I've seen them as much as a 1/4 inch shorter than the OEM one, so you got to take that into account when you're measuring the distance on your threads and add or subtract some of that, you know, like Kentucky math. So mine, the new one, is exactly the same length as the OEM one, so that's a good thing. Now on the original ones I was talking about, a pop rivet, there's a rivet right here that locks this inner tie rod in place on the rack itself. So they're kind of hard. I sat the rack on the floor and just used my big crescent wrench to break it loose. It is a little easier to take these off with the rack still on the car, So that does help. So if you've got it on the car, don't think you got to take it off the car to swap these parts out. You don't have to do that. Now I'm also going to show you these there's little plastic rack stops that go right here. If you can see that, I'll maybe get the camera off here in a second and show you that. That's a good time. You can buy those aftermarket. If you've got a wider rim on the front of your Fox, you know how they catch the K-member, the control arm, you can put a wider rack stop to keep the rack from turning all the way both directions, so it'll actually keep the wheel from hitting the control arm. That's a good time to put those in if you've got drop springs or a 9-inch rim on the front of your Fox to keep that from hitting. So that does help. So that's what I'm trying to show you guys how to do this. Save a few bucks as far as replacing this stuff. It's easy and it's simple. It's not hard to do. So let me take this off the stand here hopefully I can do this without messing you all up. And I'll show you what I'm talking about. So this is the plastic rack stop right here. They make these wider. This is about a 1/4 inch. You can double these up, or I actually think they make a 1/2 inch rack stop. So if you put a 1/2 inch rack stop, what that does, it just takes a 1/2 inch of turn out of your steering left to right. It helps when you got a wider rim on the car. Like I said, compare your new to old tie rod ends. They are the same length. This is the tie rod end, the new one, the hole. They send a metal lock pin for these on these reproductions, but I also have rivets. You can use either one. It doesn't really matter. And now that you've got the dust boot on, it's a good time to clean that. See how dirty it is still. Now on the lock tab, there is a little flat part on the other side right here. You gotta straighten back out to get the lock off. Like I said, you just open that up and it comes back off. And you can use channel locks. I use side cutters, dikes, what do you want to call them, to tighten that back up once I get it on. So that's really all there is to putting and replacing an inner tie rod end. I'm going to go ahead and clean up my dust boot a little bit better, get this other side put in, tighten it down, and show you what it looks put back together. And then I'll knock the other side out, and we'll get on to replacing the power steering hose. Super simple. I think my daughter can do it. So if you're still watching and you like these videos, hit thumbs up, subscribe, whatever. So let's get the rest of this knocked out. All right, so I got this inner tie rod put in. I got the set pin put in. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So they send you a metal roll pin right here to reset that back in. So I use the metal one on this one. What I'm talking about, you can use a pop rivet like this if you want to put that back in there, just like the factory did. That's the factory one. It's pretty simple. I got the boot cleaned up a little bit more. Once you got that on there, you're basically just going to slide that back under there like that, pop it in the groove, and reset this back in the boot, and then put the lock ring back on. So I said this is super simple rehab on a rack. The other side is just like this side, so I'm going to get both sides done, and then I'll swap out the line and show you what it looks like when it's done. So again, thanks for watching. Get this finished. All right, so I got this other side off. This one is actually really bad, this inner tie rod end, so I'll show you how bad it is and what to look for. This affects your alignment, gets you playing the steering wheel. If you got a Fox that just feels loose and it's all over the road, it's either your inner tie rod ends or your rag joint that's in between the steering shaft and the actual rack and pinion itself. Especially if you guys got like a 4-cylinder swap car, the rag joint on that is like just a cheap rubber. The V8 one is like a cloth rubber sewn together. So if you've got like a swap car and it's really bad, chances are that rubber's just gone. I've had it happen before, and once I swapped years and years back when I didn't know that there was a difference. So I'll check this out and show you what I'm talking about, play in the inner tie rod ends. So here you go. Just makes it a little bit easier to see with the boot off. You see how much play, in and out play I got on that inner tie rod end? Just imagine what that's going to do to your alignment. Now right here, see how this is nice and clean on the inside? There's no power steering fluid. The other side was the same way. So if yours is nice and clean, chances are your inner seals are in good shape, and this one was also super clean. Check out that rust kill stuff. I've been putting it on, off and on. It's eating that rust just right off of those two nuts. Stuff's crazy. So this is rack and pinion rehab for you guys on a budget, or guys just trying to save your original rack that isn't leaking, just got some bad inner or outer tie rod ends. I'm gonna put this back together, get the hose on it, and show you the finished product. All right, so for everyone watching, I got this rack, went in fully assembled. The other one, I'm waiting for the other nut to get all the rust cleaned off in that rust remover. I'll show you what the one side looks like. It cleaned a lot faster than that side. So one side's completely done. Let's check it out. All right, so this is the original tie rod end. Got a little rattle can resto on there. It's good and tight right up in here, this outer tie rod end. Now I always leave the jam nut. This is the one I was talking about. It was all rusty. See how nice and fresh it looks? This is what it looked like. It had rust all over it. Now when you get it to this point, You can put like just some rattle can clear coat, or you can paint it black, or even put some of that cast coat on it, whichever. I normally put them once I get done with my adjustment from the tie rod ends and inner and outer. I'll normally hit it with some gloss black or something like that, just to keep it from rusting again. So that's what it looks like. The boot's all cleaned up. I got the new line installed. Always put the zip tie back on there to hold them together. So I'm gonna start putting the rack in. These are the shims. The 2 nuts for the rack are on there. Now I want to hit one thing on bushings for these. Always check your bushings. These factory bushings were in excellent shape. Now I'll say this, I do not like polyurethane bushings on a street car. People can say what they want. I've tried it. My pace car had a set of lower control arms in there for old Mac stuff back in the day. Upper and lowers in the rear. I had a set of upper and lower control arms with urethane bushings. Did the proper grease and all that shit, what you're supposed to do. About 3 years later, rear end started feeling wonky. Jacked it up and the bushings were just deteriorated. Urethane bushings are mostly for race cars that you check constantly before you take the track. They're really not for street use. I don't care what anybody tells you. Urethane, nope. I don't use that shit. Factory rubber for street use is the way to go. Now, if your car's a race car, drag car, urethane's fine. But for a daily driver type car, always go back with the stock rubber bushings on a street car. I don't care what anybody says. You can argue all you want. I've tried both. I know what works and I know what lasts. I've taken 30-year-old lower control arms out of cars and the bushings looked maybe a little dried out, but you try that with a urethane bushing and see what they look like after 30 years. The bitches be gone. So we're gonna get the control arms, get a little fresh paint on there, get the rack cleaned up a little bit, get the rack put back in it. Again, this is Phoenix. So far today, I'm gonna try to get the motor put in this afternoon. I've got to put the flywheel, clutch, pressure plate, new rear main seal and all that stuff. So if I can see if I can get that done. But first I'm gonna try to get the rack put on so I can get it where I can move it around and get the motor set in the car. Again, if you guys like the videos, hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. If you are a subscriber, thanks a lot. I really appreciate that. And if you have any questions or comments, you can hit me up below or foxjunk73@gmail.com. Again, my videos are just kind of how to help you guys out, how to save $1, how to clean up original parts if they're still good. That way you ain't got to spend a ton of money. I'm going to have $80 or $75 in this rack, kind of rebuilding it. I know some cheap racks are like $175, $180 or something like that, but haven't had real good luck with those. We've tried them. They always seem to leak or they just got a lot of slop in them. So if your rack isn't internally leaking or your shaft seal's good and all that other stuff, again, that shaft seal is actually easy to replace as well. It's just right underneath that fitting. It's really easy to get to. Now, if the internal seals are gone where the main bar in the rack goes, then that's no bueno. You're going to have to try to find another rack. So again, thanks for watching. If you're still watching this video, I hope this helps you guys out. We're going to get this put on Phoenix. Again, car's still for sale. Had a lot of interest, but you know how it is. Interest don't mean purchase. Make sure you ask your wife before you call me. Get permission first. That's happened twice. Again, I appreciate it, and thanks for watching. And if you're interested in this car, let me know. Hit me up. You know how to get a hold of me. Thanks again, and y'all have a good day.